Well, good evening. Once again, beautiful jazz musicians of University Prep, and welcome to a very special edition of tonight's Vinyl Delights. As you can see, we have a very esteemed special guest here to help us with tonight's pick. In fact, this was his pick, Mr. Talbot. Oh my gosh, it's so good to see your face.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me on to tonight's Vinyl Delights.
I'm so excited. You're the only other, well, you know, other than Mr. Lewis, of course, but we don't count him because he only plays classical records. So you're the only other person in the building with a turntable in your office.
I think that's true.
It's the best, right?
Yeah.
So every time I go up to Mr. Talbot's room, he's got some cool record playing, which I just
Sure.
love.
Call me Ty, please.
Sorry, Ty.
It's okay, J-Dog.
Too many middle schoolers, man.
Yeah.
So we're super excited. Ty, a couple months ago, maybe, he said, hey, have you ever heard this record? And I was like, no, I haven't. This is crazy. I can't believe you've hipping me to a record I don't know.
Yes.
And it is incredible. So, Ty, if you don't mind, tell us what we're listening to.
Right now, we are fired up with Alice Coltrane and her record, World Galaxy. I think I got the idea for Alice Coltrane actually from Jess Klein, who said that she would occasionally play Alice Coltrane when she wanted to freak her students out. If you really wanted to play something out there. So anyway, some friends were in Seattle, and my buddy said, hey, we need to listen to something really challenging right now. And so I remembered Jess's voice, and I pulled up Alice Coltrane. And we stumbled upon this album, which she put out in 1971. So for those of you probably talked about John Coltrane in your class, right? So Alice is John's widow, his second wife. She was born in Detroit back in the 30s, raised in a Baptist church there. Classically trained pianist. She apparently, at some point after she left her first husband, she went to Paris and stayed with Bud Powell.
Oh, wow. That's
so
cool.
I guess Bud Powell, my understanding of Bud Powell is he's like to piano what Dizzy Gillespie is to trumpet.
Pretty much, yeah.
And Parker is to saxophone. Not you, Parker. Charlie Parker.
Uncle Charlie.
Anyway, so anyway, after she and John Coltrane got married, she wound up replacing the recently departed McCoy Tyner, right?
That's right.
In Coltrane's band for like a year or two before he died of liver cancer, which sounds like a horrible way to go.
Yeah.
Back in '67. And when they were still alive, they were very much musical companions, spiritual compatriots. They were really, sound like to me at least, a match made in heaven. And they, before John Coltrane died, they were really exploring some weird stuff together. Really, really interesting spiritualism. In fact, I don't know, you're a San Francisco guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever go to the Church of St. John Coltrane?
So here's the thing, man. I don't consider myself a particularly religious person, but that church is the closest I've ever come to a religious experience in my life. That is an amazing place.
As an aside, can you tell us about it?
Yeah, sure. So there's an African Orthodox church in San Francisco that decided to I don't remember the term. What there's a term when you make somebody a saint. Is it anoint?
Yeah, or sanctify them. I'm not sure.
Something like that. So they decided that John Coltrane.
No.
Something like that. Something like that. They decided Coltrane was going to be one of their patron saint, and so you go there for like Sunday morning services, right? And they have, you know, what I assume is a fairly standard African Orthodox church service, and then they disappear for a minute and they come back with instruments and they just tear into John Coltrane music for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah, I went when I was in college and we stayed for like 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
And it was like towards the end of like an hour-and-a-half version of A Love Supreme.
Yep.
I'm like, yeah, if you're a congregant, you just bring your instrument, and whether you can play or not, you join in. So.
And they used to be in this tiny little house and they lost their lease. And it was right at the time when San Francisco was dumping all this money into the Fillmore district to try to make it into the jazz district that it used to be. So they gave them like a storefront in one of their buildings. And I don't know if they're still housed there, but that's the last time I went. That's where
I think they are. I looked it up today just to see if it was still in existence. And
yeah, they have really cool, like they have these really cool like images of Coltrane with like a halo around his head and soprano saxophone.
Yeah.
And it's
sort of
pretty
like, yeah, it's very cool. Anyway, so after Coltrane died, Alice kept going. And the song that I was going to play for you tonight is the first song on here, and it's My Favorite Things, which Jason, I'm sure, knows very well. The old Rodgers and Hammerstein song from Sound of Music, which I don't know how many covers of My Favorite Things have been done, but John Coltrane did it in 1961, I think, on the My Favorite Things record. And apparently when Alice put this record out, people were kind of not very happy because she does, not only does she do My Favorite Things, but the album concludes with A Love Supreme. So the album's bookended by these two like titanic John Coltrane songs. So people, you know, I know you've been talking in your class about how there's not a lot of respect to women historically in jazz. So Alice was sort of a victim of that sexism, but she was a complete titan. Really, really impressive player. On this album alone, if you look at the awesome gatefold sleeve,
sweet,
designed by Peter Max,
nice
pop artist from the 60s who did a lot of album covers. You can look, and she plays piano, organ, harp, tambura, and percussion.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's a big history of jazz harp players. But
I can think of two.
I think John Coltrane ordered her a harp, and it arrived after he died. So between the time that he bought it for her and between the time it arrived, he passed away. Wow. So she becomes like this, she starts integrating the harp into her music. So, but the version of My Favorite Things, it sort of sounds like, at first it starts and it kind of sounds like a typical version of the song. It's got sort of a funkier riff than the John Coltrane version. Are we still spinning it?
I just started it over. I'm going to turn it up just a little bit so people can hear what you're talking about. There we go.
Like you can hear her on the organ, just letting it rip.
Tearing it.
And at some point, it's like she decides that these aren't her favorite things, and it's almost like it sounds like she took all the instruments and threw them down the stairs. It's like she breaks all of her favorite things. And then sort of all the instruments die out, and the bass player, John Workman, comes in with this super funky, cool solo. And then it starts back up again, and it's strings and the harp. It's almost like she took John's version of it, broke it into pieces, and then put her favorite things back together. And like, I think the thing I love about the song is it sounds like, yeah, I know this is his thing, and I adore him, and I love him, and I miss him, but to move on, I've got to like tear it apart, put it back together, and have it become something new. Which is weird enough.
That's such a great artist thing to do, right? But you're just setting yourself up for getting ripped to shreds by doing things like that, right?
Totally. Especially with St. John Coltrane as your guy you're ripping to shreds. But anyway, from there, the rest of the album goes into this. It sounds like a soundtrack to the weirdest sci-fi movie you've ever seen, and it's like these beautiful songs that are just have like harps and strings, but then like a wonky sax comes in and plays a very John Coltrane-ish solo in the middle of it, and you know there's this cool 60s heavy funky organ in the background, and some of the songs sound really violent, and then some of them sound like just really, really spacey and atmospheric. It ends with this. The album ends with this version of "A Love Supreme." Maybe you can start that track. It's kind of cool. If you could lift the needle on it, so to speak.
I will do that
for tonight's Vinyl Delights. By the way, Peter Max, the artist, he didn't. You can see on the back, like the design of the album is super cool. Mm-hmm. And you can see Alice is there with this Swami Satchidananda, who was her spiritual guru. And it's his voice you hear on this version of A Love Supreme. he actually was the guy who opened Woodstock. So at the beginning of Woodstock, they were freaked out. They had like 500,000 people there, and they needed some way to start it off in a calming, loving fashion. So you can actually find YouTube footage of him kicking off the big festival of Woodstock, and he reads this very, very loving statement. But Peter Max, the artist who designed this cover, was the one who suggested that he be the guy who kick off Woodstock, and he was Alice Coltrane's spiritual advisor for a long time. Eventually, she wound up kind of starting an ashram in Southern California, and all these like tapes, these legendary tapes, came out of the ashram recordings, which they've now been released. I think Impulse has put them out. I don't know if they're on vinyl.
Yeah,
but you can find them in the digital format. They're pretty cool. So anyway, so I strongly recommend not only World Galaxy, but the album that came out a year before, which was Journey in Satchidananda, which you're familiar with Pitchfork, right, Jason?
that's the only Alice Coltrane record I own, actually.
Yeah, and Pitchfork never gives 10 ratings, but
Right.
that's one of the few 10 out of 10 albums that Pitchfork has reviewed. So
Right on.
anyway, so
Hey, man,
couldn't recommend World Galaxy strongly enough.
That's so great. I so appreciate you zooming in with us here and being my very first special guest on
Thank you for having me.
Tonight's Vinyl Delights. I couldn't think of a more appropriate person to be co-hosting with me, and this is very different than the stuff that we've heard so far. So it's really great to kind of have a different flavor tonight, and it's inspired me. Maybe I'll have to throw on some Coltrane tomorrow night.
Fired up. I'll be tuned in.
Sweet. And then McCoy Tyner, and then who knows from there. We'll see. We'll get on a little Coltrane jag this week, thanks to Ty.
Well, Jason, it's good to see you. Thanks for having me. Students, we miss you very much.
Great to see you too. Thank you for being part of our class and being part of this this whole thing we're trying to do here, trying to keep the music playing.
Sounds good. Bye.
All right. Well, you have a great one. And hey, we'll have you back another time for another one. So dig through your vinyl and come up with something cool.
I will do so.
All right, man. Thank you.
See you guys.
All right. Thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow night for another edition of tonight's Vinyl Delights. Go listen to my favorite things in the comments. All right. Catch you later.